Tatsuki Fujimoto is a man that lives on an island on the other side of the planet as me, from where I'm at, and he's known for making a Twitter account impersonating his fictional 8-year-old little sister. He's also known for this. But most importantly, he's also known for this. This is what you all probably know him for, and you know, that's fair. But I was really curious. Chainsaw Man is well, the show definitely has character, let's put it that way. It's a show that contains such subversive tides in its narrative that it might as well redefine the very foundation of what it means to be shonen. So I asked myself a lot of questions. Why Denji? Why the ultra concentration of deliberate multifaceted strings of narrative leads that outcome to our main character being a chainsaw man? But most importantly, why the fandom? This video was a mistake. But yeah, I believe those questions probably can be all answered by just looking at this dude's past works. And just for fun, I decided to rank them too. And just a disclaimer, these rankings are not subjective whatsoever, stay mad. I'll also be putting a full spoiler warning for all of his one-shots I'll be covering, and there are a lot of one-shots. Since there's not all that much content in there in the first place, it'd be hard not to spoil anything, in all honesty. For his longer works, I'll specify the spoilery bits. So his work I least enjoyed is a one-shot that goes by the name of Imouto no Ane. Now, with a name like this, there are usually two possibilities for how its plot is gonna turn out. I'm not going to discuss those details in this video, I'm not going down that rabbit hole, but Tatsuki Fujimoto somehow created a third possibility. This is a one-shot about a pair of sisters who draw each other nude. I'm going to repeat that for absolute clarity. The author of Chainsaw Man made a manga about sisters drawing each other nude. This is the moment I realized that I was doing a video on a sick man. But in all seriousness, Imouto no Ane is about a girl that goes to an art school. And one day she finds out that her sister was awarded with some type of prestige that gets her painting hung up in front of the whole school. But this painting is of her drawn nude. And, you know, anyone in the school could just see this as they walk by. And so they eventually recognized who it is in the painting. It's such a shitty and creepy thing to do. And we're also told that the sisters haven't really talked to each other in a little bit. So we're led to assume that the other sister is just being a real asshole. But then the main girl draws the sister who originally drew her naked. And then for some reason, this is like a thing that bonds them together and they make up and they start living together and then live happily ever after. I did leave some things out, but like, I don't think you care, or you shouldn't at least. If I were to speculate the point of this story, it'd definitely be the important role of an older sibling. And you know, that's pretty wholesome, but one problem, Fujimoto doesn't do wholesome. If anything, this is indicative of the larger character quality of Fujimoto, that he has good morals, but at the end of the day, he's just a degenerate. And believe it or not, knowing this actually makes it easier when trying to understand and analyze his later stuff. Next up, all the way down in rank 11 is a one-shot called Siren Rhapsody, which was ironically a wholesome read. Ironically because, well, before reading this, Tatsuki Fujimoto and wholesome seemed like they'd both be listed in the examples of the dictionary definition of oppositions. So this was a shocking read for me, explicitly because there was no batshit crazy plot twists, nor fandoms, nor an absolutely sociopathic callous cast of genuinely unhinged characters. Instead of all that, we have a Beastars-esque type of setting, where mermaids and humans are destined to be at odds with each other because of the simple fact that they eat each other. But set in a town by the shore, Toshihide is the son of a mermaid and a human, and sometimes he skips school to swim underwater and play the piano, like his deceased mother did. A mermaid overhears the melody and checks it out. Both the boy and the mermaid eventually become very good friends, coming to give piano lessons every day. But then suddenly a shark attacked Toshihide, and when his blood diffused into the ocean, her mermaid instincts for human flesh spiked and she ended up hurting him. After a while of not seeing her, they reunite after apologizing. Toshihide plays his piano to connect with all the mermaids to prove that mermaids and humans share a love for music and aren't really all that different. To be real with you, I thought this was really generic. And I mean, that isn't expressly a bad thing or anything. The theme this story tries to go for has been run through and tried so many times by now. I can name a few off of my head that just do this story better. But you know, it still has heart to it. I didn't hate it. I feel like this relates to his later work because you know that one trope in shonen where it'd be like, oh, the human race has been terrorized by deadly sentient underwear, and then the protagonist will be like this half underwear, half human to fight against the underwear. I feel like this one shot displays the immature version of this trope that will definitely be taken a look at in future titles. Niwa Tora. Oh my god. Niwa Gatora Gaita. Which probably translates to something, is a one-shot that somehow is 20 times stranger than the title itself. I really don't know how to start with describing this manga at all, so I'll tell you how I experienced this questionable roller coaster. The manga starts with an ordinary morning in suburban Japan, except that all the residents of said suburbia are grotesque creatures, which, you know, I thought was going to be some sort of metaphor for something like how the main cast of characters in Uyasumi Punpun are all birds, but no. This is 2019 Japan, where Fujimoto predicted COVID-19. This manga is set in the time span after aliens invaded and killed off or eaten most of the humans on Earth. And for some reason, these aliens are assimilating into the culture, acting like humans, going to school, and even having the same tropes as humans. No, but honestly, I give credit to Fujimoto on this aspect, because this man somehow found a way to make a tsundere a JoJo's reference. But anyways, the real main characters aren't actually these aliens, it's really these humans who wear chicken masks to cover their faces to trick the aliens into thinking they're actually chickens. They actually have an explanation for why this works. This manga actually has a consistent world if you just were to excuse the very small insignificant number of plot holes that come with it. But to sum it up, these kids mostly get by impersonating chickens, until a transfer student alien that's known for liking the taste of chicken moves into town. The humans meet a friendly alien that protected them against the chicken man. And after defeating the chicken man in a duel, he takes them to a secret location where there are other humans hiding out, when a police alien stops them on the way, killing the friendly alien while looking like this. So obviously there's no chance in hell these puny little kids survived, is what you're probably thinking. But psych, one of the kids was actually an alien the whole time and he's badass. And he saves his friend that he vowed to protect even though he's an alien. What the fuck? What the fuck did I just read? I spent 10 minutes of my life consuming this. Give me my 10 minutes back. So, like, the moral of the story, don't even ask me. I've been trying to figure this out while writing the script for like 30 minutes now. But what I can tell you is how this relates to Fujimoto's future works. Because out of all the one-shots I've read so far, this is probably the most Fujimoto-esque, where the weird and wacky nature of everything is just amplified to a stupid degree in this manga. But this exemplifies a surprising integral building block of understanding Fujimoto's manga, where events just, like, happen, where the reasons for a certain plot point existing isn't even explained until after the thing happens. Like when the aliens all thought the kids were chicken, we only got an explanation after being terminally confused about this, which is really unique. So for now on, these next manga and one-shots mark where I actually could say I started to enjoy what I was reading. No offense to these mangas I've already gone over, they all had charm, but I can't really say in good faith that they were good necessarily. Though the next good to decent work of Fujimoto is called Shikaku. Shikaku is a one-shot about, well, it's a story about a lot of things. But first we are introduced to prototype Makima, and through some disturbing imagery we come to realize that she's a psychopath, and she's also a hitman. One day she gets a job from a stranger and he asks her to kill him, and the reward for carrying this job out would be... But then he regenerates. You see, this stranger is a... You see, this stranger is an immortal vampire, and he's hired the famous hitman Shikaku to put an end to his incredibly long life, because he's bored. He's tried everything, and hiring a hitman was just one of the methods he's resorted to. When Shikaku left, after effectively failing her mission, she felt some sort of throbbing in her chest area. She went to the vampire man about it, and he told her that it's probably just a cold. Okay, so her response is to, without any disguise, just stroll into a hospital where she immediately gets surrounded by the FBI, or wait, the JBI? Whatever the Japanese version is. And on the TV recording of this attack, she proclaims that the doctor confirmed she didn't have a cold, but that she's fallen in love. Vampire Dude sees this and starts cackling for the first time in 400 years over her absolute fucking insanity. Shikaku confesses her love in the most unhinged way possible, and he turns her into a vampire, and they live happily ever after for the next 200 years. You know the story. This one-shot puts a spin on the dry and completely flaccid genre of the vampire romance, where it manages to grip even me, who personally despises the genre. Shikaku is very interesting because every single character in it is fucking insane, and this is definitely foreshadowing future events. Sasaki-kun stopped a bullet? Sasaki-kun stopped a bullet. Sasaki-kun stopped a bullet. Sasaki-kun Stopped a Bullet is still a one-shot of Fujimoto, and it's a manga where Sasaki-kun stops a bullet. Okay, this is not funny. Sasaki-kun ja Juden Tomida, going by its Japanese title, is relatively short, and it stars our main guy, Sasaki-kun, who's just an average Japanese high school student who has a crush on this teacher, and he literally reveres her as a god, which oddly enough might be a little bit of projection, being that Fujimoto was still in school when he published this. Sasuke was thinking about asking his teacher out on a date when a suspected terrorist strolls into the room and threatens everyone. Yes, really. This man has been bearing an ageless grudge on the teacher of the classroom for abandoning him in high school and leaving him as a perpetual virgin. Everyone takes him seriously though because he's waving his gun around over at people. But when he threatens violence against the teacher, Sasuke, drunk on his own fantasies, speaks up and he ends up annoying the virgin to the point where he pulls the trigger. But Sasuke-kun stops the bullet, of course. He then goes on to explain to the virgin how he's from the future and knows the outcome of everything to come, even the bullet's exact trajectory, which was how he was able to catch it. The manga then cuts to Sasuke-kun 20 years later as an astronaut, and he explains further how him stopping that bullet 20 years ago was impossible using his knowledge of astronaut physics. And it ends. This is weird. I'm sure you didn't need me telling you that. You could just get that from the description of this manga. But oddly, even if its presentation is full of really exaggerated developments and really out there explanations, this incredibly short one-shot communicates actually a pretty coherent message. That, you know, nothing is impossible, and no matter how unlikely something is, you can never prove it to be a 0% chance. And also that some versions of the truth may vary from person to person. If truth is subjective, then maybe Sasuke-kun didn't catch the bullet. But of course, there's always that possibility that he does. I guess this tells a story set in a timeline with a lot of negative exponents next to the percentage probability of this happening. But this is the way that Fujimoto a lot of the time structures his work. He'll start out with a very basic theme, but executes on this theme so uniquely that at the end of it, you really don't know if the theme he started out with was so simple in the first place. Even if it didn't really last very long, I enjoyed this manga. But in the future, it's very clear to me that Fujimoto really refined his style and developed as an artist overall. Mi wo samitara onako ni nain. Mi wo samitara onako ni nateo boyo. Which roughly translates to when I wake up and become a girl disease, might be a little bit controversial, but I don't think it should be seen that way. It covers the story of a high school student who is afflicted with a disease that forces them to turn into a girl. There's nothing they could do about reverting back to their original form, so they're stuck. I don't want to run into any pronoun problems, so I'll just go with using they them to describe our main character. But so yeah, they unwillingly turn into a girl and they get unnecessary attention from this, even some threats. Some call them lucky that they'd get to experience life as a girl, but in reality, their social life is basically ruined, and their relationship is now resting upon a shaky foundation. Of course, it's tough with something like that changing up your whole life, but all it took was commitment to press on and be able to reconstruct the important things in their life. Obviously, the I woke up and became a girl disease is a funky and eyebrow-raising plot device. But in terms of laying the basis for where this story's moral is produced, I think it's justified. It's merely symbolic of a much simpler theme, based in reality. That, shit happens, out of people's control. But you can't just give up because something unfortunate's happening to you. This is just Fujimoto. He isn't just going to tell a story about how asking a girl out on a date is hard. He's gonna exaggerate it. He's gonna tell a story about how supreme beings from heaven or some aliens from outer space all descend to Earth specifically to interrupt some love confession. But of course, I just made this up all on the spot, right? Love is Blind exists, and the plot of this one-shot is exactly how I described it. A high school student wants to ask a girl out with whom he shares pretty good chemistry with, but insecurities was the first thing blocking him from speaking out. But then, as he musters up the courage and battles his insecurities, his clueless teacher abruptly interrupts him. But after he was able to shake off the meddling teacher, he walks her home while building back up the courage to confess, when some random dude just tries to mug the both of them. Then our main character, the absolute Chad that he is, proceeds to ignore the mugger and tries to confess again. But then a UFO pulls up and a built-looking alien comes out and explains that the Earth is going to be destroyed, and where his response is to explain that his confession in this moment holds more consequence than the Earth itself being eviscerated. And then finally, after deflecting all of his ops, he gets it out and confesses his love. This one made me laugh very hard. I mean, it just has objective humor to it. Not because of the ridiculous and out-of-pocket shenanigans that occurs. Well, yes, some of that. But mostly it's because of how relatable it is. The concave pressure placed on you before those words come out of your mouth is like the world is enclosing itself onto you. And it's almost like the response to the confession holds greater significance than the fate of the entire world. The only difference between this story and reality is that his insecurities take physical manifestation. Oh, and also she said yes. I actually really enjoyed the next one shot named Yogen no Nayuta. It actually has a really engaging premise in itself, but honestly it's a really good read and I'd recommend reading it yourself. This one shot is about the birth of a prophesized devil with devil horns that's destined to destroy the world. The brother who lives with this demon child, or Kenji, is conflicted between his instinct as an older brother to relay compassion to his younger sister and absolute horror at the revolting malicious acts Nayuta commits seemingly with no thought behind it. He doubts her morals. He starts to believe that maybe the prophecies were right. But he decides that even if it's true, that he will still not stop loving her. Though the situation is so bad that they can't even communicate with each other. Others who believe in this prophecy seek to end the devil child's life, and he has to deal with those people every day. He gets fired from his job because of her, but this supposed demon is curious herself. Like, even if she's responsible for a lot of truly repulsive, morally reprehensible deeds that only someone without a human ethic could possibly even fathom, she's kind of a goofball. Nayuta obviously loves her older brother, but she can't have a normal conversation with anyone. Whenever she wants to say anything, the one thing that comes out are like exclusively quotes from a 14-year-old's fanfic of Mirai Nikki. Only the most unwarranted, edgy lines are permitted to escape her mouth. There's this one time in the manga where Kenji was breaking the news that they will likely not have enough money anymore for ice cream, and that he was fired from his job. And then her response to that is just blood splatter spray severing eyeball. This gave me a good laugh, and it cemented Nayuta as just a character that doesn't understand anything. The reason she kept bringing Kenji the carcasses of dead animals was because he never ate too much food, and she wanted to help him. One day, at random, she uses her magic. Yes, she has magic that lets her control a bunch of swords. She basically threatens the lives of a lot of people, though Kenji smacking some sense into her was enough to bring her back to reality. It was the first time Kenji scolded her because he was too frightened to do it beforehand. At the end of the manga, they move out of town and they're located on some beach. Then Nayuta writes in a notebook a question: "Am I scary?" Kenji says, "Of course not." And then Nayuta responds with, "Exploding kill." This being one of Fujimoto's later one-shots exemplifies the maturity of his style of storytelling, where a lot of the wild and wacky stuff in the story isn't just exaggeration for exaggeration's sake. It's exaggeration to prove a point. The point of this story being the unbreakable bonds of siblings. So, now that you've done it twice, Fujimoto, does this mean that you can delete Imouto no Ane off the internet now? Please? Now obviously his exaggerations in his other stories had a point to it, but this seemed more focused and generally better crafted. Look Back is a one-shot about Fujino, who's ultra confident about her skills drawing manga until she absolutely shits herself finding out about someone else's art in her class, named Kyomoto. But this doesn't make her give up or surrender. It forces her to rigorously hone her talent like she never has before, to the point where others around her get concerned for her social life. And eventually years pass and she graduates, but there's an issue. Kyomoto is a shut-in, so one of the teachers requests that Fujimoto take the graduation certificate to her place. And that's when she comes across this. When she drops off the certificate and leaves, Kyomoto runs out to meet her and explains how big a fan she is. She brushes it off at first, but then she starts dancing. She's ecstatic. They become good friends and start drawing together, until eventually they get serialized. But Kyomoto winds up wanting to go her own way into an art school, so she does. But not long after Kyomoto made her decision, Fujino received word of travesty. She's dead. On her funeral night, Fujino recounts the circumstances of how she met Kyomoto, and starts to think, what if? What if she never brought her out of her room that day? She ends up stumbling upon a question. Would she have given up drawing if it meant saving Kyomoto? Of course, her answer is yes, she would give it up. And that right there is what defines Look Back. While you're, no pun intended, looking back at the days that mattered, that's when you identify what things were truly important. That it wasn't really drawing that was necessarily important. No, it was just a device driving the creation for the truly significant memories, which was the time she spent with Kyomoto. This theme is conveyed through the very deliberate paneling in this work. This is where I think Fujimoto's paneling work shines a lot. This was an enjoyable read. I really liked it. Now for the next 3 of this man's works, I consider all GOATs. 3 manga that would all personally land in my top 20 of all time. Just so you know, their rankings are separated just by the slightest margin. Fire Punch, ever since binging its entirety in an afternoon, has cursed me with an existential confusion. But this confusion is not only nested inside the greater context of this manga, but also a deeper layer underneath the surface level. Fire Punch is a manga that portrays every single expectation from the moment your eyes meet the cover art. Heavy spoilers for chapter 0 and slight spoilers for up to chapter 53. From chapter 0, we're introduced to a dystopian society where a fantasy witch of ice has covered the entire planet in thick snow. The village of our main character, Agni, is stuck between a rock and a hard place, with limited to basically no rations left remaining. Also, our main character has been blessed with the ability of ultra quick regeneration. Actually, a lot of people in this world were blessed with specific abilities. So was his sister, Luna. Agni wants to protect her at all costs, so the village turns to exploiting our main character for food. They survived longer because of Agni, but when someone else blessed visits the village, that person realizes what kind of acts of blasphemy were really being tolerated here. He decided that he'd burn it all down with his blessing of flames that can never be extinguished. Agni caught on fire, but because of his regenerative abilities, he didn't die, but the fire continued to rage on. He witnessed his sister burn to death. Months passed, and he couldn't even move a single limb. 3 years in, he could finally stand. 8 years and he can control his flames. This is the origin of Agni. He wanted revenge. Throughout the runtime of the manga, Fujimoto tries to answer one question. How far can you break down a person until they cease being that person anymore? To a point where Agni starts out losing everything, but he perseveres and makes new relationships. But then he loses that too. On and on until in the infamous chapter 53, we see the culmination of every single misfortune acted upon him. He's in the position where someone who stole everything from him is right in front of him, but he doesn't do anything. He can't do anything. He expresses his confusion, cries, and makes the Agni face. This manga has no chill. It's chaotic, very chaotic. Like, there's this one time where at the end of a pivotal arc for the character of Agni, the exact panel where it ends, he looks out, and then out there lies an existential threat to the survival of the human race. Agni gets no time to rest. It's like the world was trying to drive him off the brink of insanity. He does what a manga protagonist does best, and he never gives up. But he only keeps that mindset until he asks himself, why? Why endure the pain of these flames? Why continue to travel upon this hopeless, cold world? Why live in the first place? It was when he asked these questions and nobody answered that he ceased being himself. There was no Agni anymore. There was no Fire Punch. Fujimoto won. He succeeded in answering his morbid question. So, my confusion, yes. My deep confusion with this manga stems from a simple question. How the fuck did this get published in Shonen Jump magazine? What? This manga doesn't even try to censor anything. Its action usually ends up being completely one-sided and short, and most of the time, it's just weird. This show sets expectations and then just proceeds to not even acknowledge them later on. There's this one character named Togata who's kinda like the main character of the first half of the manga, but they want to make a movie and force Agni to be its protagonist, while he's also the main protagonist of the manga. You see, it sounds confusing as I'm describing it, you really just have to read it. Like with any other Shonen Jump work, you could just give it adjectives and nouns, like Naruto, ninjas, underdog, action-based, but then when you shift your gaze to Fire Punch, there's literally no words we could possibly invent to describe what is Fire Punch. It's something that lives in its own universe, and it's funny to me how Fujimoto got his first chance to publish in the world-renowned Shonen Jump and just decided to make this. That doesn't mean that I think Fire Punch is bad though, quite the opposite. This character's main villain motive is that once she acts out her evil plan, she might be able to see the new Star Wars movie. Togata, who's actually one of my favorite characters, cannot go 1 second without making some sort of movie reference. This manga is weird, but it's a good weird. There's this part of the manga where all you need to know is that Togata is driving to escape pursuers who want her dead. And then she's regenerative. And the funny part is that it happens again. The paneling work in this manga helps its narrative significantly. It assists with the emotional, the shocking, and also some of the moments that happen in this manga that you wouldn't believe actually happened if I haven't showed you. This manga is a ride that will be incomprehensible to some, but to those who understand, those who see past the strange and the wacky elements of the story, those are ones that call this a masterpiece. It's not for everyone. You either despise it or you love it. And if I'm going to be honest, if Fire Punch had a better ending, it'd probably trump over the manga ranked second, which is Chainsaw Man. Chainsaw Man is, well, Chainsaw Man. Who doesn't know about the devil hunter boy with no morals and the intimidating leader of the devil hunters who owns a bunch of dogs? This show is borderline universal, even before the anime was released. You might have noticed that my questions I started out with in the beginning intro, why Denji, why the Chainsaw Man, and why... Well, you might have noticed I haven't even tried to answer them in the slightest, and that's because there are no specific answers to these stupid questions. The real answer is that Fujimoto thought one day it'd be cool that instead of making a moralist, bigger-than-life protagonist, people could relate more with an average kid with, immature morals. That's how he came up with Denji. While creating Fire Punch, he thought up the goofy idea of a chainsaw coming out of the main character's head. And the third question, well, don't ask me. Maybe Fujimoto's therapist knows. I don't know. But those aren't really the questions that matter, really. One question that does is, why do we love Chainsaw Man? The answer could very well be because of the ultra goofball, ultra relatable protagonist, Denji, and the way he stumbles around in his chaotic world kind of doesn't resemble the character qualities of a protagonist at all. He's just like an average normal dude who was roped into all this craziness. But I'm going to take it a little bit deeper. Spoilers for up to chapter 15, and I think it's episode 5 of the anime. I may be wrong on that. Though Aki is a character who had his entire family massacred by the gun devil. Himino is a character who's gone through 6 partners in her time as a devil hunter, and she's watched every single one of them die in front of her. Power is a socially inept character that, even though she is a devil, tries to connect with human. Kobani is Kobani, and we all know the story of Denji. He was pretty much dealt a shit hand in life. The key is, when all of these broken characters get together on one mission under one roof, it's like all those characters act as glue, piecing every single broken part back together to form one highly flawed, highly damaged group of individuals, but when acting as a unit, they heal each other in a really cathartic and satisfying way. But then when this unforgiving world tries to mess with this unit, that healing reverses itself in a very unsettling, morbid fashion. Kinda like a car crash you can't look away from. That's really all I have to say about Chainsaw Man. There's not really much I can say that hasn't been said already before. Believe me, I truly do love this manga, this show, and that's why you might be asking yourself, what could possibly rank above it? Well, in my personal opinion, Goodbye Eri takes the #1 spot for me. It is genuinely one of the greatest experiences I've ever had with manga. I'm going to start this off with a disclaimer. Actually, no, not even a disclaimer. Just read this manga. It's honestly best that you go into it without knowing anything about it. Just take my word for it. I won't let you down with this recommendation. Trust. If I do, you could just say whatever mean thing in the comment section. But just read it. It's a one-shot, so it's relatively short. So now that you're back, you've experienced something I can only describe as a masterpiece. For those people who continued watching without reading the manga, I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for getting this far into the video. Let me describe the plot, just to make sure everyone at least has experienced this insane roller coaster. Yuta is a young boy that has learned of some confusing news. That apparently in a very short time, his mother will die. His mother, for whatever strange reason, wants her last moments on this earth to be recorded, so she buys Yuta a smartphone to do it with. Every manga panel from now on is framed from the perspective of the recording as we see every moment pass by. He captures the happy and sad parts leading up to his mother's death, just like she told him to. And then finally, Yuta's father gets a call from the hospital that her final few hours are coming. But when they get to the hospital, Yuta's father explains to him that his mother wants him to record her final minutes before she dies also. But Yuta can't bring himself to do it. He runs away as the hospital scene behind him blows up into smithereens, like some sort of movie. Actually, it is a movie. A movie being casted to the whole student body of Yuta's school. The whole film was created using real footage, yet something was off. If this was all truly Yuta's experience back then why would he choose to screen these extremely private moments to strangers? It seems disrespectful to his deceased mother, and most importantly, what the fuck was that explosion at the end? It seemed like some sick individual was trying to manipulate his mother's corpse for his own self-gratification. It's no surprise that people start to pick up on these weird and kind of gross ways Yuta chose to present his movie. The movie had a lot of people describing it as unnerving and quite hard to watch, so to process what they've just watched, people started mocking it relentlessly, calling it disgusting, weird, gross, all the negative adjectives. To Yuta though, he put his entire being in that film. And it's really hard when you create something personal and something really good to you, but then everyone looks at it and makes fun of it. So he decided that he was going to take his own life because of the backlash. But then when he arrived at the place he was planning on dying in, he met this girl and she was strange. Once she realized that Yuta was responsible for the movie, she dragged him into some abandoned building to watch movies. A lot of movies. It seemed like she was implicitly insulting his movie-making skills by making him observe real film. But she wasn't insulting him. She actually wants him to make another movie because she liked his first movie so much it brought her to tears. So he wrote scripts. Plenty of scripts, which he was told were average or uninspired. But then, I think it was here that it clicked for Yuta, and he proposed another idea, where the protagonist makes a movie about him recording his mother's death, but gets mocked relentlessly. But then this vampire girl starts making him watch movies, and even though she's a vampire, she doesn't have long to live. The boy decides to record their final moments together as they fall in love and make memories, and that he will record her death and make up for running away that one day. And it all happens according to his proposal. After Eri drew her last breath, Yuta screened it at his school once again, to a very different audience feedback, as people's reaction aligned with Eri's final wishes. But Yuta's life afterwards isn't as poetic. He goes back to the thousands of hours of footage he's taken of his mom, and he realizes the answer to the question of what kind of mother would force her child to record her own death. Well, it's someone who's a little bit egotistical and obsessed with how people will remember her. She was not the best mom. So him editing that explosion scene at the end of his first movie symbolized his willingness to move on and choose how he remembers his mom himself. And it also highlights his inclination for always adding a pinch of fantasy, like with Eri and her being a vampire. Even after Yuta grew old, met someone and started a family, he couldn't stop being engrossed in re-editing Eri's last moments. He couldn't move on, and he didn't know why. One day though, he was stripped of everything in his life except for Eri. A car crash unfortunately took the lives of his family. Feeling aimless and empty inside, he decided to visit that one abandoned building where he actually saw Eri again, who explained to him that she's a vampire, so she can't die. Yuta asked her how she could cope with everyone around her eventually dying as she stays young, and she responds with, "I'll be fine because I have this movie, and I'll never forget you." Yuta leaves the abandoned building and finally realized what irked him about Eri's movie, and he found that it was missing a pinch of fantasy. What resonates with me after reading this over and over and over again is always how much attention to detail lies within every single panel, how every drawing focuses on illustrating a single emotion. Emphasis is placed on every single word because they all foreshadow something, even in the comparably short runtime of this compared to his other works. If there is an awkward air between the characters in the story, then the collection of subsequent panels will vividly paint out this awkward tension with a chronological set of meticulous drawings which only has purpose in conveying said emotions. The paneling work in this manga is something of legendary scale, which not really many other manga out there in my opinion that can compete. The fashions which the paneling tricks the reader into assuming one thing, but then revealing that they've been misdirected into thinking the story was about this or this or this, when the actual story is about this. In the course of the story, the narrative shifts so many times with such a disparity between them that it's clear that it's not telling one oversimplified narrative that has a beginning and an end. It's just a story about someone who's been subjected to a series of constant tragedies stretching over the course of his life, and he's been led to cope with these tragedies in a certain way. The story doesn't end when you think it's gonna end, it keeps on going. This someone has finally been broken down, enough to a point where he's finally learned how to reconstruct himself. It's a story about tragedy, the agony of loss, and most importantly, building yourself back up. You might think it's ironic that seemingly the least Fujimoto-esque work ranks as my favorite of everything he's done, but I wouldn't look at it that way. Sure, he's an author with a weird personality and even weirder creations, but he really can't be defined by these descriptions. Actually, I think what defines him is having no definition. He's really someone who's constantly pushing the boundaries of storytelling, and especially the way that's conveyed through manga. I personally love his work, and through this video I became a way bigger fan of his. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like and maybe consider subscribing. If not, then a dislike and a comment. See ya.